Our speakers today are Michelle Midgette, I am a speaker, Connie Ussery, and Dixie Turman. We are proud to represent all these women from the book club who have varied experiences and so much insight into discussions we have about the books as we read them. We've been meeting out in the pavilion, but we finally moved into the meeting house. And it's so great to be part of that program with the book club and with all the other things that we're doing at this fellowship. Michelle Midgette retired from teaching high school English, and English is a second language for adults. She also was a civilian public affairs specialist for the U.S. Army. Dixie Turman was an Army wife who taught Lamaze classes at each duty station. She retired from the Muskogee County School District. And I, Connie Ussery, am a retired librarian from Muskogee County School District. I love to travel, and I facilitate classes at Columbus Academy of Lifelong Learning. And selfish plug, if you're interested in that, let me know. And now for our regular talk, our Sunday talk. From the book club, here's one of our outings. We have never done this before, to my knowledge, so it was just a great thing to go and visit Judy Barnett's daughter's bookstore in McDonough. And now, Michelle Midgette.
Good morning. It's really good to be here in our fellowship where we all believe in the worth and dignity of every human being. Sadly, there are a lot of people in America who don't share our beliefs. The book I'm going to talk about today reveals how white supremacy has transitioned and expanded. The title is Rising Out of Hatred: The Awakening of a Former White Nationalist. It's written and very well documented by Eli Saslow. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for the for the Washington Post. I read the New York Times. Published in 2018, the book is even more relevant today, and it was written with hundreds of hours of interviews and the full cooperation of the main subject. The focus of the book is the life of Derek Roland Black. He was born in 1989 in West Palm Beach, Florida. His father, Don Black, was the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan for almost 10 years. And his godfather, David Duke, probably heard that name before, was also a previous leader of the KKK. When Derek was born, his father decided the KKK was not helping to achieve white supremacist goals. So he left the KKK, and he started our nation's first white pride website, stormfront.org, still on today, and a radio show. Derek was a precocious child adored by his parents. He hung out in science museums, read encyclopedias, studied German, and played guitar. He loved everything. His favorite subject was medieval history, which he later pursued academically. Don started taking Derek with him as a child to white supremacist conventions in Tennessee. And Derek created his own Stormfront website for children. Later, Derek began speaking at the conventions and on his father's radio show. Soon, he was seen as the darling of the movement because of his brilliance and his likable personality. So he was the future of the white supremacy movement. Over time, the white supremacy movement morphed into the white nationalist movement. So it was the KKK, then the white supremacy movement, and now the white nationalist movement. Why? To gain more mainstream support. They said no more racial slurs or frightening language, no more Nazi insignias or law breaking. The main idea, which they're still pushing, would be preventing white genocide. According to their thinking, they were the victims being overtaken in their own European-based country by immigrants and minorities. As a teenager, Derek said, "We will not be replaced in our own country." They claimed that whites were an endangered species, and Jews were plotting to undermine them by promoting multiculturalism. They were also Holocaust deniers. And, worst of all, they believed that non-white European descent Americans should leave the country. Derek's life changed when, after 2 years at a community college, his parents sacrificed on their limited budget to send him to New College, a small honors college in Sarasota, Florida. He kept his beliefs a secret. Nobody at the college knew that he was a leader in the movement, the white nationalist movement. He would get up early, go outside, and call in to the radio show that he shared with his father. Meanwhile, ironically, he had become friends with a Peruvian immigrant, an Orthodox Jew, and he was dating Rose, also Jewish. He decided to take a semester abroad later in that year, and he was in Ireland and Germany. While he was gone, a senior at New College was doing research on domestic terrorism. He discovered on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of extremists that Derek Black was a leader in the white nationalist movement and was listed as an extremist. So he debated whether to tell everybody and decided he should. So that information was revealed on the forum at the college. The students went wild. They protested. They said, he should be expelled. We don't want him here. The administration was in a quandary. He was a good student. He had not said anything about his views on campus, and they knew that he had freedom of speech. So they just ignored it. Eventually, it died down a little, but he was still getting hate mail and was taunted when he went out along the campus. But his friends decided they would try something different. They said, let's continue to be his friend, and maybe we'll win him over to thinking that he's on the wrong track. So Matthew and Moshe, his Jewish friends, invited Derek to attend regular Shabbat dinners in their dorm room on Friday nights. Sometimes there were students there who were Black or Hispanic or gay. Of the females who came, Allison, a Catholic of European descent, eventually became very close to Derek. First, because she was curious, and she was a psychology major. How could a person who was as kind and intelligent as Derek have such shocking, horrible beliefs? Gradually, over a few years, with their friendship and Allison's love and support, he came to realize that white nationalism was an oppressive and harmful belief system. He started withdrawing from calling in. His father thought, oh, he's too busy with his studies. Derek was torn between loyalty and love for his parents, who had been very good to him, and shame for spending years promoting white nationalism. Finally, he had the courage to speak out publicly. Not to speak out, but to write out publicly. In 2013, he sent an email to the Southern Poverty Law Center rejecting white nationalism, and he gave them permission to publish it. It was published widely. His parents saw it, called him and said, you've been hacked. And he said, no, I haven't been hacked. I'm done. I'm no longer a white nationalist. It's oppressive and harmful. His parents were so hurt, devastated. They said, we never want to speak to you again. And then they called back shortly afterwards and said, we didn't mean that. So being the loving parents that they were. But he had a strained relationship with them for a long time, and it continues, especially with his mother. After the election of 2016, his father said, everything you advocated for is finally beginning to catch on. Don't you see that? Derek said, of course, we're coming up to the critical moment. That's why I'm trying to warn people. And this book is a warning. As shocking as the truth of white nationalism is, I found some hope in this book, considering that Derek Black, who had been raised in a cocoon of racism, could reject the movement with the support of his friends. He continues to publicly speak out against it, and we can only hope that others can change their hearts and minds. Thank you.
And now Dixie Turman.
The book I'm featuring is Syria's Secret Library by Mike Thompson, and he's a BBC correspondent. When recommending it to friends, I have to be careful because they think I'm saying serious secret library. This book focuses on the importance of books. When the siege in Syria took place after the Arab Spring in 2011, young men in their early 20s decided to join the freedom fighters. With their studies in the university interrupted, they began collecting books in the destroyed homes of Daria. They would do this at great risk to their lives while dodging snipers as well as bombings, with the front line fluctuating back and forth. It's difficult to understand how al-Assad's regime in Syria could be so brutal, especially when towns like Daria had a long history of peaceful protests for widespread reform, respect for human rights, and democracy. Gathering the books in bombed-out areas and placing them underground created a library that became a refuge for many. Over time, a wealth of books on a wide variety of subjects was collected. Not only were there book club meetings, the library became a learning center and a sanctuary. Several examples. There was a 14-year-old boy who discovered the library while running to shelter during an air raid. He lovingly dusted and cataloged each book. Amjad declared himself chief librarian. A dental student was called upon to help people with toothaches. Iham referred to textbooks on dental procedures to learn new techniques. A 12-year-old girl named Islam read continuously to keep her constant hunger at bay. A rebel artist inspired everyone with his protest paintings. Malik was well known as their local Banksy. Now, the Urban Dictionary defines Banksy as a person who paints short, political messages on someone else's property. We met many other courageous people who continued with their personal lives, marriage, babies, and they encouraged each other. Mike Thompson had heard rumors about a secret library. He went to great lengths in order to reach these young men, using Wi-Fi and Skype. Of course, connection was intermittent. One of the students created a makeshift hotspot a good distance from the library using wires and tinfoil and such to gain better access. After 5 years under siege, citizens of Daria were given 48 hours to pack 2 bags of their belongings before being forced to leave the city. They were given 2 options. Most families chose to go to a refugee camp near Damascus, but first they had to testify that they did not support the revolution. The freedom fighters couldn't do this in good conscience, so they chose to go to Idlib, where it wasn't as safe. On the 27th of August, 2016, everyone was gone from Daria, and the town was leveled. The struggle to survive in Syria continues to this day. The people of Daria knew firsthand, and I quote from one of the students, "Just like the body needs food, the soul needs books." And I do have some examples of the Banksy, if anybody wants to look at them afterward.
Well, my book was a lot of fun for me. Truth evolves through the connections we feel in good historical fiction, or it isn't good historical fiction. A recurring theme in M.R. Toll's books is his exploration of the intersection of privilege and servitude, and the tenuous balance of those cultural and political identities. Just as those intersections are exposing chinks in political, religious, economic, social, and community institutions right now, they were happening in Russia 100 years ago. So it is with the gentleman in Moscow. It began shortly after the Russian Revolution in 1917, when Bolshevik rule sought to overthrow everything that was considered an antiquated and destructive society. Count Rostov represents that society himself, but he was attributed with the composition of a poem he really didn't write, but a friend of his did, that supported the Russian Revolution. So in his trial, he was found guilty of being an aristocrat, but spared for being lucky. Not only is he lucky, he's interesting. After he is sentenced to house arrest, he suddenly turns from the Metropole Hotel prestigious guest to a Metropole prisoner. He wakes again the next day for breakfast, and he returns to his room, taking the stairs two at a time because that was his habit. He likes to find a challenge in everything he does. He likes to make it interesting in some way, and that's what he does with his house arrest. He sort of teaches us how to live mindfully in his way. He adapts, but he doesn't change his values. He doesn't lose his good humor, and he never loses his temper. He's well educated, but he's not pedantic. He's wealthy, but he's not arrogant. He personifies what we would call culture. I admire his ability to accept all the limitations that he cannot change. And around him, the entire country is coping with repeated sweeping upheavals in his former Russia. I can relate to him as he turns to books, to his music, and to the comforts he can afford for himself during his decades-long confinement to one single building. Only for us, it lasted about a year. But we know a little bit about how that went. The massive historic metropole is where he finds more stairs to climb, more spaces to explore, and more people to meet. As I read, the real hotel became a point of curiosity. I looked up online and found images of the spacious rooms I could rent right now. The price is pretty reasonable if you don't include the airfare. Amar Tolles himself stayed there many times, but he didn't limit himself to the real setting. He altered the character of the place, but he cited many events that celebrated its place in history. I found an amazing photograph of Vladimir Lenin on a platform above Red Square, where thousands of people were thronged around him. The Metropole Hotel is clearly visible behind him among other buildings in the Arts and Theater District, and most of these were preserved. That building is really in the far upper right corner. It's the one with all the windows to the right of the one with the big arch. It wasn't destroyed probably because the people and their leaders understood its place in the past and realized its impact on their future along with these other buildings. They would need a place of comfort for visiting dignitaries. They would need this space preserved to remind them that power is tenuous. The hotel became a refuge during the austere years following the Russian Revolution, and this hotel had to be maintained. Guests of state needed a place to feel at home. The new Soviets needed to exhibit stability through some connection with the finer institutions from their past, no matter how much they struggled against them. Can you imagine the cognitive dissonance of funding the maintenance of this extravagant building as they were trying to feed the people while trying to figure out who was responsible for what? They even added an American bar complete with jazz music. I know. Imagine journalists joining each other there on the ground floor of that magnificent Russian hotel through decades that spanned worldwide depressions and events like World War II and the Cold War era. Amar Tolles himself was one of those journalists. That place sparked his creativity. He was a guest here many times, talked to a lot of people who became characters and composite characters in this book. He placed his protagonist under house arrest so that everything in the metropole and the historical events surrounding it could be amplified. He was here in Columbus at the library for a talk about this book when it was just gained popularity. I believe it's being filmed now. It may have already been filmed and is going to be a movie. But his talk about this included his experience writing it and sitting in the room, which was the room number that he had Rostov imprisoned in for a while. And there is the Bolshoi Ballet building right behind him. Rostov takes the reader among the people involved in those events, but we experience them through his filter and his discussions with fellow guests and employees. The book touches on events preceding the revolution itself. Catherine the Great has a minor role as the image on Rostov's stash of 200-year-old coins. So I ended up reading an amazing biography about her by Carol Lee Erickson to learn more about her and the Russian Revolution, Russian history before the revolution. A Gentleman in Moscow has little to do with her, but it has a lot to do with the grandeur and the culture of Russian aristocracy of which Rostov had been a part. It also has much to do with the philosophy she studied as a student and close friend of Voltaire. I wouldn't have known it just reading A Gentleman in Moscow, but the Great Catherine biography explained her close relationship in letter writing back and forth with Voltaire through decades. And repeatedly, as I prepared this program this morning, I thought about Voltaire's famous lines, and Ron reminded me, "History is only the pattern of silken slippers descending the stairs to the thunder of hobnail boots climbing upward from below." In a review by Bill Gates, he asserts that the book has nothing to do with wealth, but of course it does. In fact, the lesson one takes away is an appreciation for Rostov's inheritance of the finer aspects of Russia's greatness, the education and refinement that allows a person to feel comfortable, whether he's walking into a room where warring leaders are jostling for position, as he did as a waiter in the new government, or as it evolves through decades of upheaval, or whether he's choosing which items to move to his more Spartan quarters when he's kicked out of his beautiful, spacious hotel room. Tolles has Rostov work as a lowly waiter in order to give him more interaction with hotel guests and employees, and to engage his mind with his knowledge of food and wine as he exercises his casual wit with everyone, including himself. Before Rostov turned from guest to prisoner, Tolles says that the Count reviewed the menu in reverse order, having learned from experience that giving consideration to appetizers before you choose the entree can only lead to regret. A description like that tells you so much about a character. He was, above all, charming. Rostov teaches appreciation for education and gentle manners. He teaches humility. He teaches patience. Through it all, he teaches history from a new perspective, a view from a window and from a seat in the dining room. And through his observations and his experiences and his encounters with guests and hotel employees, he gives us a sense of how political turmoil affects everyone, not just those directly involved in it. Tolles created Rostov as the perfect character to follow through the massive political and economic shifts experienced in Russia and in many other parts of the world since 1917. After all, it's called Russia again, right? He chose the perfect location to spend those events around a small hub, a tiny little couple of blocks in downtown Moscow. And he chose the perfect milieu. Everything about the 20th century changed at the end of World War I. Rostov saw the losses and the gains humanity experienced through it all. We follow him through it, and we accept it all as he does. And just as any good book guides us to understand the presence, all threads of the story lead us here. And here is where my talk about the Gentleman in Moscow ends.